Welcome to footballgameplan.com, where football makes sense. I'm Emery Hunt, the czar of the playbook. Bring you our NFL Week 1 preview between the Cincinnati Bengals and the Chicago Bears. Now let's take a look at some keys to victory for both teams, starting with the Bengals.
The Bengals are extremely talented on both sides of the ball. Offensively, as much as people want to knock Andy Dalton, I think he's a good quarterback that has gotten better each and every year. And adding a guy like tight end Tyler Eifert in the draft and an emerging talent and number 2 option Mohamed Sanu, it just ensures that he's going to be going in the right direction. But defensively is where they make their money. Look at defensive tackle Geno Atkins. He's one of the best in the business. Vontaze Burfict is coming off an impressive rookie season, and I like what they have in the secondary. I'm glad to see George Ialoka finally crack the starting lineup. He's a very good player that can play free or strong. The only concerns I have about the Bengals are the depth at the linebacker spot. A lot of injuries in the preseason and in the offensive backfield. I know they drafted Gio Bernard. They're going to need him to be the go-to guy in order to help this offense take the next step. Now let's move over to the Bears in this matchup, and they are similar to the Bengals in terms of talent. Big-time wide receivers, in my opinion, with Brandon Marshall, who's a perennial All-Pro, Alshon Jeffrey. You also look at Earl Bennett and Devin Hester, and they've added a tight end threat to own the middle of the field in Martellus Bennett. And Matt Forte is one of the more underrated running backs in the game. This is a guy who can do it on the ground as well as a receiver out of the backfield. Defensively, despite losing Brian Urlacher, I think they'll be fine. I think they've actually upgraded the athleticism and gotten younger at that position in the offseason with Kasim Green and also John Bostic. And in the secondary, they still have Charles Tillman, a guy that's a turnover machine, does a great job with coverage as well as creating those opportunities for the offense. The biggest concern for the Bears has to be that offensive line. If Mark Trestman can get these guys to play consistent week in, week out, and Jay Cutler can trust that protection, this could be a dangerous football team moving forward. Now let's go inside the lab to take a look at some X's and O's for both teams in this matchup.
The Cincinnati Bengals come into this matchup versus the Chicago Bears knowing they have to get pressure on Jay Cutler, and where the Bengals have the advantage on the defensive line. And here's how they can apply pressure with different stunts and getting after Jay Cutler. Now what we have is your basic Pro 4-3 or a variation of it. And this defense we're going to draw up is 2 strong man weak coverage, which means we're going to have cover 2 on this side, man coverage over here. He's responsible for half the field. He has no responsibility but half the field. He has a quarter responsibility, and he has get a good bump and has out responsibility. So here's how we're going to get the stunt up front, so that way you can have get some pressure on Jay Cutler. And what we're going to see right here, the strong side backer is lined up in a 9 technique. And his job is to contain strong side versus the run. Now versus the pass, he'll drop back and curl out responsibility. And you also look at the defensive end, the strong side defensive end. He's lined up in a 5 technique position. Versus run, his job is to control the C gap. Now versus pass, he's going to engage the right tackle, and then he's going to push hard to get inside that B gap. Crossface, slant toward that B gap, get pressure that way by going inside. The strong side tackle is in the 2 technique position, and his job versus the run, he's going to have to control that B gap, and versus the pass, he's going to cross the center's face and attack that weak side A gap right here. So he's going to cross the center's face, attack the weak side A gap. Engage, then cross. Now, the weak side tackle, his job versus run, he's going to have to contain that B gap here, but then versus pass, he's going to engage and loop all the way around and replace where the defensive end crossed the face of the strong side tackle. And this is his responsibility here. He's going to play contain versus the quarterback. And the weak side end, his job is to spy this running back versus pass. But versus run, he's going to have to make sure he controls that C gap. And you have the weak side backer with his job is to make sure he contains on an outside rush. That's his ability to get pressure. And the middle backer is going to overread the run, which means he's going to fly up to read the run and drop back in his coverage responsibility, given that banjo look right here. So that's how they can apply pressure versus the Chicago Bears offensive line, by creating different stunts up front. Hopefully that explained how they can get creative moving those guys around. And they do have the advantage because they do have guys that are athletic and that are quick to get pressure and that can push that pocket. The Bengals should have a lot of success versus that offensive line of the Bears this week. If Chicago is going to have some success versus Cincinnati this week, they're going to have to protect Jay Cutler while protecting their own offensive line. I think the one-back protection scheme can help these guys out in a big way. You're going to see right here, we have it drawn up. Your classic one-back protection scheme. You have Forte in the backfield. You have your tight end on the line of scrimmage. and this can be your slot wide receiver, or if they want to get creative, they can put this as their tight end and bring in your second tight end if you want to get Martellus Bennett out in a route. But the one back protection helps your offensive line out, and it also still accounts for 7 guys. If they bring 7, you still are well protected up front, and you also still have the ability, if no blitz comes, you can send guys out in a route like Forte with the check with me system, and a running back will always block opposite of the strong side, he will block opposite of the tight end. And it's important for the center and the guard to communicate. They are responsible for those guys that threaten their area. You want to step in and be responsible for those guys that are accounted for. And the running back, like I said, will always be accountable for the weak side threat as the rush, whether the backer lines up here or if they shift to an Okie front and he lines up here, he's responsible for this guy. If he lines up over the tight end or over the H-back, he's responsible for the slot guy as well as the H-back. So the back will always be responsible for the outside threat of the rush. And if he doesn't come, then you can send Forte out in the flat. But really, it's protecting you guys up front and your guards and your centers and your strong side tackle. Because if they're getting interior pressure like the Bengals can, you're going to need all 4 of these guys to step up and play big. But the one back protection does help the offensive line, giving 2 guys blocking 1 with the threat of 1 coming. And if you want to leak that tight end out, now he can get off and be able to better contain that defensive end. So I think if they go to a one back protection scheme this week versus Cincinnati, it can help them have success in a running game. It can help them have success throwing the football, and it can also help out that offensive line containing those 2 big defensive tackles.
Now, here are some coaching points for both teams in this matchup. For the Bengals, Gio Bernard in a downfield passing game, I think they can have an advantage in that aspect with Bernard versus the linebackers of the Bears. You want to exploit that. And speaking of linebackers, Ray Maualuga has to do a better job in pass coverage. He struggled last year. They're thin at that position due to some injuries in the preseason. He's going to have to step up and make some plays. And on offense, if they utilize different bunch sets, whether it be 3 wide receivers bunched together or 2 tight ends and a receiver bunched together, or even a running back and a receiver and a tight end bunched together, you have to utilize those bunch sets versus a Bears zone defense, and that way you can have some success. And for the Bears, you can't forget about Matt Forte, one of the premier backs in the game. You want to give him his carries, not just touches, but carries out of the backfield, and that will take some of the pressure off Jay Cutler in that offensive line. And you also want to keep Julius Peppers on the move. Sometimes play him as a 9, play him as a 7, drop him back in coverage. You also want to play him as a 1 or a 3. Move him along that defensive line, and you can have a chance to frustrate what the Bengals want to do offensively. And you want to stay active at the line of scrimmage on defense. I've talked about this before. Andy Dalton throws a lot of flat line passes. He tends to stare down a target, and that can result into tip passes, which then can result into interceptions. The X factor for the Bengals will be the ground game. They can't allow themselves to be one-dimensional this week versus Chicago, who would just love to pin their ears back and get after the quarterback. The X factor for the Bears, not only in this game, but for the duration of the season, will be Jay Cutler's ability to throw the football and trust his protection. If he can stay comfortable in the pocket and stay well protected and go through his progressions, this could be a dangerous offense. I like the Bears in this ball game. I think their defense right now will be able to give Cincinnati problems in the passing game. They can get after the quarterback. They also can drop back in coverage. I think their linebacking core is one of the best coverage linebacking cores in the game, despite losing Brian Urlacher. And on offense, they will be able to run the football with Matt Forte and utilize him in the passing game. Although the Bengals will be a tough matchup and be a very good team throughout the course of 2013. And if I had to make an off the beaten path Super Bowl pick, it would be these 2 squads. I really like what they bring to the table, but I don't see the Bengals going on the road and knocking off Chicago. And I want to give a huge shout out to Bear fan forums and Bengal fan forums for always showing football game plan support.